Okay, so now we're ready to get to the fun part. Now we're ready to sew. I'm going to actually sew one of each of the shapes for you because I think this is the critical part that most people need to know: how you're oriented at your machine, how you manipulate your fabric as it's feeding under. I'm going to show you the technique that I use and that I teach and that I encourage you to play with, which is called pinless piecing. You'll see me talking about it a lot inside of the patterns as well. So the first shape that we're going to go kind of from the largest to the smallest. So the first shape that we're going to piece is our full circle. So let's open that up. We have registration marks already pressed. Everything's already cut out for us. So that's our circle. And you see the registration marks kind of pressed all the way around it. And this is our background fabric. So we're going to look at that. And I always look at these right sides up and then I flip. So when I'm flipping, I flip them right sides together, and I'm going to align kind of the rightmost registration mark on the circle fabric with the leftmost registration mark on the background fabric. And I give really clear diagrams inside of your pattern. That red circle, that indicates where it gets placed under your needle. Before we put this under our needle, so that we don't sew ourselves into a corner, we're actually going to flip that back and out of the way. We're going to keep this aligned, and we're going to place this right under our foot. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is to sew a few stitches and stop with the needle in the down position. And I have my machine set so that the needle stops in the down position every time you stop sewing. If your machine does not have that setting, then what you're going to want to do is get into the habit as soon as you stop sewing to turn your needle so that it's in your fabric. What that's going to do is that's going to secure your place. Now, we manipulate the fabric a lot more when we're sewing curves than we do normally. And if you were manipulating the fabric and shifting it under the needle, that needle really helps to hold our place. So make sure you get into the habit of doing that. It'll help to make a really nice, smooth process. So after we sew a few stitches, start with the needle in the down position, we're going to match our first registration mark. So I see it here, and I'm matching it with the registration mark on the piece of fabric underneath it. Now, a couple of things you're going to get in the habit of doing. We do a lot of adjusting in this process. As we're adjusting, if you get fabric in front of your foot or in front of your needle, we're always lifting that foot and pulling the fabric to the back from the left-hand side and putting our foot back down. I have my knee lift on my machine, and if I move my knee to the right, it lifts that foot right up and down for me, and so therefore I can concentrate on just using my hands. And either I'm pressing this to the base of my machine, or I'm holding that in my hand and I'm using my opposite hand to adjust the edges of the fabric. Basically just aligning those edges of the fabric. A little bit about those curves again, the only place they align is along the stitch line. So each of those two edges are actually a different length. So if they're just laid together, they're never going to end up being the same length. So you do have to work with it just a little bit as you sew. So we sew and we adjust that fabric so there's no bulk right in front of the needle. We continue to sew to the first registration mark, stop with the needle in the down position, match the next registration mark. You see I'm stopping with my needle down, I'm holding that registration mark, I'm adjusting my edges, have a little bulk in front of my needle, I stop and adjust, so I'm pulling the fabric to the back. We stop and adjust, and I find I do adjust a lot more when I have a skinnier piece of fabric than I'm working with. So you're always going to take your time with this process. You can speed up with curves a lot, but that comes with practice. So I can sew these pretty quickly now because I've sewn quite a few curves over time. So but give yourself the opportunity to kind of develop the muscle memory with this particular process. So a few stitches, make sure those edges are nice and aligned. Oops, I just cut my light off. There we go. Stop at the next registration mark. Match the next registration mark. Now I'm flipping that fabric so that the right sides together as I go around that curve. for the circle. Adjust those edges together, get the bulk out of the front of the needle if there is any. Just like that. It's a really easy process. Now this is, if I'm not mistaken, this is an 8-inch curve here. So this is actually one of the smaller curves. With the smaller curves, you just adjust a little bit more. If you're a beginner or a newbie and you're playing with this technique, then I encourage you strongly to play with the 12-inch. The 12-inch is really fun for featuring large scale fabrics or your favorite prints, and it goes together a lot quicker and easier, but most importantly, the curve is a lot easier to sew. So it lets you get into the habit of sewing those curves and without making quite as many adjustments. Pulling that fabric to the back, I'm holding at the registration marks, I'm adjusting those edges so that they fit nicely together. Pull that fabric to the back so it doesn't have bulk in front of the needle. This is the same process no matter which shape we're sewing. Stop at the next registration mark, and now that's pretty much matching our last registration mark, and then we sew back to the beginning where we started. Now the beauty of this process is that you're not going to get to the end and have a bunch of excess fabric. That's because we're making adjustments in each small section as we sew along. Sew to the next registration mark, and now we're going to sew to the end. Once again, we have a little bulk in front of our needle. We lift our foot up and adjust that fabric to the back. Adjust the edges so they match up nicely, just like that. And once again, once we get to that small kind of section, a lot of times I do find that I adjust a lot more than I do on the sections where I have a little bit more fabric. We're at the end of our seam. I just cut my thread, and we open that up, and we have a gorgeous pieced circle. Of course, we're going to take that and press it. Now, technically, you can press out or in. A lot of times it depends upon how small I'm going to square it down. If I'm squaring it down quite a bit, then I press it in so that my seam allowance does not come out into the background, and I can have that part if I want my circles to touch. But you technically can press it in either direction. Okay, let's look at piecing the half circle. That was fun, right? And easy. So for the half circle, once again, I give you very clear diagrams inside of the pattern. So it's going to show you the way that you orient your fabric. You put your half circle fabric on the base of your machine. You're looking at it pretty side up, so the right side of your fabric is facing up. The right side of that curve goes under your needle. And let's move these out of the way real quick. Let's open that background up, and we're placing that right sides together, the left side of that curve with the right side of the half circle, just like that every single time. We place it under our needle. Once again, 1/4 inch settings, sew a few stitches, stop with the needle in the down position, match your first registration mark. We're hold with one hand and we're adjusting with the other. We're getting the bulk out from in front of the needle, so I'm lifting that foot. Once again, you may have to reach behind and do it, but I'm using my knee lift. Gotta love the knee lift. It's funny because I'm one of those, I always call myself a lazy quilter, so I don't always put the 1/4 inch foot on and I don't always use my knee lift. But in this with this technique, because our hands are used so much differently at our machines, I utilize both of those, and it just makes the process a lot more smooth. Stop at the first registration mark and let's match the next one. We're adjusting that fabric to the back, holding at the registration mark, and I'm using my other hand and fingers to kind of adjust those edges together so they're nice and flat and kind of aligned at that edge. If I get any bulk in front of my needle, I'm pulling the fabric to the back from the left-hand side. That little bulk in front of my needle. When you pull that fabric to the back, so sometimes I'm reaching behind my machine to do it, but this is what I'm doing here. I'm pulling the fabric to the back from the left-hand side. It just really pulls the bulk out from in front of your needle, and it really helps to reduce and eliminate puckers in your sewing. Match that next registration mark. Now, for those of you who love to pin, for some people, pinning is a comfort thing for you. You're very used to pinning. You like to pin. Pinning makes you happy. My recommendation is to leave a pin cushion by your machine, and as you're kind of walking through the same technique, you would stop at that next registration mark and pin at the next one. So don't pre-pin necessarily. Still utilize the strength of this technique. And also if you're having a hard time like holding onto your points or whatever, you're going to do the same thing. So I'm holding onto the end, which is the last registration mark. Is actually not marked, is actually the two ends of the fabric, of course. I'm adjusting with one hand, I'm holding onto the end with the other. Got a little bulk in front of my needle, so I'm pulling that fabric from the left to the back. And once again, we adjust a little bit more as we're going into the skinnier section of that curve. And you're just going to take your time, stop, and adjust. Just like that. Cutting our threads. And voila, we have half circles. So exciting. This is one of my favorite shapes. I even like to put the two together and make a full circle, which is really fun. So that's half circle. Quarter circle, a lot of you guys have done this before. Of course, the quarter circles in this pattern are designed so that you can trim them down so that they touch. But if you add a little bit more of that background fabric, then you can make it into a drunkard's path, which we know has a ton of possibilities as far as quilting is concerned. So let's take out our quarter circle pieces. This is our shape. We have our registration mark already pressed right there in the center. And this is our background. I probably should have picked a different background from white, but I think you guys can see that pretty clearly there. Once again, in your pattern, it is clearly laid out. The red circle is what goes under your needle. So I always, in most cases, it's that right side of the curve, and the shape fabric goes on the base of your machine. So pretty side up, this is your curve, the right hand side of that curve. And then we place this right sides together. The left hand side, when it's right sides together, the left hand side of that shape matches up with the right side of the shape fabric. So the left hand side of the background to the right hand side of the shape fabric. And the pictures, once again, are really, really clear. So this is where your needle goes, that red circle on that diagram. So once again, sew a few stitches, stop with the needle in the down position, match your first registration mark. And I love these because they sew up pretty quickly. If you get bulk in front of your needle, what are we doing? We're pulling it to the back. You guys know the drill by now. But I repeat this over and over and over again because it's not an intuitive process. And until you learn it, it's good to hear it kind of in repetition. So in this video, as well as in my classes, I do the same thing. I teach it over and I repeat it over and over and over again. Match the next registration mark. Whoops, didn't want to lay flat. Just like that. Adjust that fabric to the back. Smooth the edge out, kind of adjust the edges together, just like that. And we're going to sew. We're getting bulk in front of our needle. What do? We pull that fabric to the back from the left hand side. We're getting to the skinny section, so we have to adjust a lot more. Just like that. Woohoo, look at her. Isn't she a beauty? I love it. And the beauty of these shapes, the only two with a 10-inch right now is the half circle and the quarter circle. But when you piece these together with the 1/4-inch seam, it actually forms a perfect circle. So you can start to mix and match the shapes and have a lot of fun. So here comes the fun one. So this is the shape that a lot of people are really excited to play with, which is the orange pill shape. There's kind of unique ways to cut that inside of the pattern, which helps to minimize your fabric requirements, which is fun. We have 2 pieces for the background, and in this case I have my background as a print fabric, and my orange pill shape is actually a solid, but these are still the 2 background shapes, and this is our orange pill shape right here. So the shape always goes on the base of your machine. We're going to piece this curve first, so the right hand side of that curve goes under our needle, flipping that background right sides together. The left hand side of that background matches up with the right hand side of the shape. Once again, if you flip that pattern open, these are very, very, very clear for showing you how do you place it under your machine. So when you don't watch the video, you don't have to watch a video over and over again. Just flip open your Clammy Basics pattern and take a look at that image. Sew a few stitches, stop with the needle in the down position. Match your first registration mark. It's only that center registration mark in the end on the orange peel. This is the same curve we've been sewing over and over and over again. This happens to be with a 10-inch as well, so it's the same size curve as our quarter circle and our half circle. So if you've been sewing those all day, I keep turning my light off for some reason. It's because I'm positioned kind of to the side so that I can show you guys the machine. So I'm sitting at a kind of an awkward angle for your benefit. So a few stitches, start with the needle in the down position, match your registration mark, adjust those edges together. If you start to get bulk in front of your needle, if it starts to fold or anything like that, just lift your presser foot, adjust that fabric to the back, align those edges nicely. We got a little bulk in front of our foot, smooth it out nicely, stop at the first registration mark, match the end, just like that. I love sewing these. They go together so quickly and easily. Now, a lot of people have you glue based and do all of that. I actually don't do that until I work with my smaller curves. So feel free to try to perfect this technique. It will save you a lot of time and hassle, and you'll still come out with really great, nicely sewn curves that match up really nicely. We sew to the end of that. I cut my thread. Now, normally I will press this first, but since I want to go ahead and continue with the demonstration, I'm just going to kind of finger press the ends just so I can demo it. I should have grabbed my little seam roller so I can do that. Just to get it kind of out of the way, it needs to be pressed nicely here. But this gets pieced to the other side. Now these background pieces are oversized a little bit so that you can square your block down once it's pieced together. So we look at it right sides together, flip that background over, and what I'm doing right here, if you can see it, I'm overlapping it past that seam line by 1/4 of an inch. That is the perfect placement, just like that. We're going to start to sew. Stitch a few stitches, stop with the needle in the down position, match our first registration mark. And then we're adjusting those edges together. It's the same curve that we sewed on the other side. It's the same curve we sewed to our quarter circle, same one for our half circle. Now, I have slowed my machine down to about half speed. I can do these a little bit faster now because I've done this a ton, but I also want you to slow your machine down just a little bit because you want those curves to be nice and smooth. Once again, I'm overlapping past that seam line. If you see the seam line there, about 1/4 of an inch as well. That's going to allow us to square it up perfectly, just like that. And one other thing, if that very last, if it's really difficult for you to hold on to that very last part of that curve, then feel free also to stick a pin in and let the pin hold it for you. Some people will have difficulty holding on to that. I'm adjusting the edges together. Make sure it's nice and smooth right in front of your needle, right in front of your foot. If it starts to get any bulk, we adjust it by pulling that fabric to the back. It smooths it right out, just like that. So right to the end, take that off of my machine, And we have an orange peel. Now you will notice, looks like my thread, pull it just a little bit there. That'll be nice and flat when we press it. Now you will notice that there's sort of irregular corners here. And that is because we oversized our background just a little bit so that we can square it down to the proper size. And inside of your pattern, it gives you instructions for how to square up your blocks as well. So I hope that was really clear for you, and that you see how easy it is to sew your orange peel, your quarter circle, your half circle, there we go, and your full circle blocks.